Saya Ifik Arifin.
Saya Edward van Leent.
Dan saya Didik Partono Rudiarto.
Kita berada di TEKNIX by Inixindo. Hello, Mr. Edward van Leent.
Good afternoon.
Is that the right name, Edward van Leent?
Yeah, you can say that, Edward van Leent. That is the Dutch pronunciation, but most people turn it into Edward van Leent.
You are Dutch.
I'm sorry about that. Do you want me to leave now? Shall I leave right now? No. Okay.
Welcome in Inixindo.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm glad that you're here. We can talk. I can call you Edward, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead. And Pak Didi, you accompany me to
Yes, I will.
to ask tough questions about
Questions.
data center.
Definitely, yeah.
All right. Okay. Edward, let's start with computer room. Yeah. No, before we go to the data center, our topic. Almost every institution 20 years ago, they have a computer room, and then they change to server rooms. They have a quite big room with equipment, air condition that is very, very, very cold. And then, you have a carpet too, that you have to take out your shoe before you came in. That's quite annoying, right?
Yep.
Quite annoying. And then you have everything, UPS, something like that. And then they call it data center.
Yeah.
Is it still valid?
Yeah, well, that's indeed how it started. So that's many years ago. So you've just revealed your age to me now. But that's how it all started. A couple of computers in a normal office environment. Then we got a more centralized type of environment where people had a desktop connected to what we call the big iron. So IT equipment in the backyard, so to speak. And that's where we saw the first server room starting. Typically a traditional office, putting a few computers in the room, hang up a traditional air conditioner to cool it, and that was the carpeted office environment. But over time people saw that was not adequate, a lot of hardware failures, etc. And from there it starts moving into a more professional environment like what we see today, where equipment is organized in racks, which at that time was also not the case because of the big variety of type of equipment. Now it's pretty much standardized, but at that time it was like a museum, many equipment, different sizes, different shapes. So it has come a long way.
So I understand that you are Edward van Leent, which is the founder of EPI. Mm-hmm. What kind of computer is it? Enterprise product integrations?
Of course, there are many varieties. When we started, there was actually more a power integration company. That's how it started originally in the UK, where we started power integration systems. But people started asking, because we were always in mission critical environments, to help us with establishing computer rooms, including the air conditioning and fire suppression. So that's how our company has evolved as well. Yeah. And then obviously we started off a company in Singapore, which ultimately became the head office.
That's not far from here.
It's not far from here. It's a stone throw away if you can throw fast and far. But so that's where we started. And the name EPI was already registered in the Singapore business.
PTA Ltd.
PTA Ltd is a private limited by shares.
Limited, yeah.
And so we had to come up with another name. And we said, we do a lot of integration at the enterprise level. So we said, okay, we officially register it as Enterprise Products Integration, but people know us really by the name EPI. That's the brand name. And in different countries you have different registered names.
And you do mostly the training, right?
There are two parts of the business. We have the training business, which is one of the larger portions of the business. And we do auditing and certification for data centers as well, both at the facility level, so looking at the M&E and the building and the fire suppression, etc., as well as data center operations and governance.
So, training and certification.
Correct.
And I read some news that EPI is one of the biggest training center of data center.
Correct, yeah.
Wow.
So we're the largest data center training company
globally.
The largest
globally
if you
in
take,
the world.
In the world, actually, yeah.
Right.
If you take, say, our closest to competitors and you combine them, then you still have to do a multiplier on top of that one to reach our numbers. So we are proud to say that we're largest. I guess it is because of our focus and also because we were the first ones that really started with an accredited training program for data center professionals.
So Edward, we are very proud to be your partners of training data centers. We know each other since about 15 years.
15 years
Yeah,
ago,
yeah, this has been a very long time ago. Yeah.
But do you remember when we met Edward
Yes.
in Hotel Shangri-La?
Yep.
What we have done? How can we convince him to be partnering
Pak
with
Ipik
us?
is wearing a Javanese hat.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember?
Traditional, yeah.
The Blancon?
I remember, yeah.
You know, Pak Ipik,
Yeah.
now I realized the name EPI stands for Edward Profit Integration. Because the companies become very, very big.
Yeah, that's okay. I never thought of that. That's good. It's a good one. I'll go back to Singapore and change the name.
Nah.
Was that the same one? No, you had the
No,
brown,
I don't know.
brown one. Yeah,
I don't know if it's
remember.
the same
you had,
one.
You had the brown batik shirt and the brown hat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine that you think, wow, what kind of crazy person is that?
No, but I think what struck us at the beginning was like that level of comfort that we had immediately when we met. It was like, you know, we like
Friendly
to laugh,
environment, right?
friendly, also a good sense of what the market needs, and obviously Inixindo had a big reputation in the market already. So for us, it was not too difficult to say, okay, let's start a partner agreement, right? Because it's about business, but it's also about people behind the business.
But still, we have to convince you. So that's why we show you our identity.
Yeah. Yeah. And the big knife, that we had, just to give a little bit of extra stimulation to sign, right? We're gonna cut out that one.
Okay. Now in the data center process, there are some steps like plan and then build, and then run it, and then evaluate and so on. Let's talk about plan. So you have to choose a location, right? This is not trivial. The location must be free of earthquake, free of flood, and must be higher or just flat.
Flat is
Anything
good.
flat is good.
Flat is always good.
The higher is also the better.
The higher compared to sea levels could have an impact on cooling capacity and how you
Cooling
size it.
capacity.
But then you have to really go to the 1,000 meter above sea level and all that in order to see the impact. So in Asia we don't see so many trouble with it.
So if somebody asks you in Indonesia, where do you want to be located, this new data center?
Right.
Yeah.
It's tough, right? It's site location is important, but ultimately any data center project really starts with the planning process from a business point of view, because you don't build a data center out of a hobby, right? You build the data center to fit a business purpose, so that is always the first one to evaluate, and from there you start trickling it down to, say, site location, how much space do we need, what type of data center do we need, etc., etc. Location is tough in this part of the world because, ultimately we are in an earthquake type of zone.
Right.
You could be in a flooding zone as well.
Yeah.
So then, if you are in an area where those natural risks, natural disasters are happening, then the key thing is to look and say what could potentially happen and what could we do to mitigate that risk, or maybe totally, get rid of the risk, or maybe you say as a business we just have to accept that risk because risk just too costly or just impossible to overcome.
Right.
And certain things are under control, like for example in my home country, right, in Holland, a big portion of Holland is underwater, literally under sea level.
Yeah.
So theoretically not a very smart idea to build a data center in Holland, but plenty of data center. It's one of the biggest data center countries in Europe together with the UK. So you're looking at risks, how much risk can you mitigate, and some of the risk you just have to accept.
Many people do not know that Holland is
under the sea level. Yeah.
Under the sea level.
Yeah.
Right?
That's why we're very tall, because you have to look over the dikes to see the sea. So that's why we keep stretching all the time.
Okay, and other factors is you have to have redundant things like electricity, internet, some facility that you have to be in your nearest, your nearest. So I also heard that many companies go to Sweden, for example, to build a data center while they have a good cooling.
Yep.
They have a good air,
Yep.
very very clean air. Humidity also acceptable.
True.
And what do you think about if we Indonesian people let's build a data center somewhere else and then use for us?
Sure. Yeah. Theoretically, you could argue, say, put the building in the best location in the world to either leverage of free cooling or sustainable energy.
Free
etc.
cooling, right? Free cooling.
Yeah, nothing is free ultimately, but yeah, it is in a way
Almost.
free, almost free. But I guess the problem is, of course, if you build a data center in, say, Sweden, and you want to use it for, say, national purposes here in Indonesia, you get issues either with latency, right, in terms of network traffic, data residency, because obviously Indonesia with the laws, right, doesn't allow data to be residing, or at least government-sensitive data to be residing in another country. So there are always limitations in that sense. Theoretically, I would like to build my house in a different part of the world because it's nicer and it's cheaper, but I live in Singapore. So same story, right? You can't always get the best of both worlds. So in Indonesia, you build in Indonesia, you look at the best optimum location, which has to do with many factors, right? Risk. And again, if I put my data center in the middle of nowhere, because there the land is cheap, etc., I still need to have quality people to be able to run the data center. So how do I get now access to skilled workers that I need for my building? So yes, I can choose any of the how many islands Indonesia has, but does it have the power? Does it have the redundancy, the network connectivity? Do I get skilled workforce in the location? So it's not easy to get the perfect location. So it always ends up in some level of compromise.
Compromise also. Yeah, that's we have to think about that. Yeah, to build a good data center in that sense, right? And after planning, we have to run it. Right?
Yep.
So you run a data center, then you have to be qualified or certified in something like level of data centers, or you call it tier data
tier
centers.
Or rating, there are different.
What is the least tier in data center?
Right. Well, to clarify, there are two terminologies you typically hear in the market. You have in terms of tier or rating. Tier is what is established by an organization called Uptime Institute. And when people talk about rating, then typically it relates or rated typically to TI 942. Those are two of the competing reference points that people typically design data centers for.
Okay.
In terms of classification, they all have 4 levels.
Four
levels, yeah. And level 1, so tier 1 or rated 1 is the minimum. Typically good for non-critical environments, so it's lower cost to build, but it has a high level of potential interruptions due to single point of failures, etc. And then you can go all the way up to level 4, which is what they call a fault-tolerant data center. But fault-tolerant, people think nothing can go wrong, but of course there are still things that go wrong, because fault-tolerant refers to one single fault at one point of time.
Murray's law. Nothing can go wrong. It goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So it will always be, right? And so I think you touch on a good point, because a lot of people think when I have this Rolls-Royce type of data center, you still need business continuity planning. You still need to, because a fire in the computer room can still create downtime, multiple points of failures. If there is one fault, by right it should not go down. But sometimes we see occasions where the generator went down, UPS didn't kick in, so now you have 2 faults and still things go wrong. So always plan for redundancy, always plan for business continuity.
There are a lot of things that...
And human errors also, right?
Human errors. Actually, Pandidike touched on a good point, because depending on which study, and obviously multiple studies come always out with different numbers, but typically they say the human error factor is somewhere between 40 to 70% of the reasons why data centers go down. So you can build the best data center in the world, but as Pandidike says, if you don't have skilled people or proper processes in place, then you are still victim of the human error. And again, that's proven to be the biggest point nowadays.
Because you already talk about human errors. Can we do the automation, something like that minimize the human errors?
So automation can help. But obviously the automation should not have any faults in it himself as well. So if I have process technology that automates what we called in our days the PLCs, the programmable logical control. Nowadays people go in DSIM, so data center automation tools, IoT, AI, etc. So all those things help. But yeah, programs sometimes also come in a state that they do the wrong things, right? So we all have to reboot our phone every once in a while because sometimes it suddenly hangs because of multiple factors that suddenly create a software state that is undefined. So humans are always important, but automation definitely can help.
Yes.
Especially when it's routine tasks. Because people,
Yeah,
when we
boring
are
tasks, routine tasks.
that's where typically the faults happen, right? We get bored, do it
Yeah.
over and over again. That is why, and Padidik probably can relate to the story I was told many years ago. I always am very close to the airline industry as well. And if you see, the airline industry is very good at process.
Right.
So no matter how many times the pilot has flown the same aircraft from the same location to the same location, they still diligently go through this checklist.
One by one.
One by one. And that's why we have so little human errors, relatively speaking, in the airline industry. Whereas the data center industry is less regulated, less enforced to stick to the process. And that's where people say, never mind, I know. I've done it 10 times, I know what to do.
Let's go.
Let's go. Because I want to go home. and that's where things go right. Complacency in processes is a big issue. And unqualified people.
Well, but I can imagine that everybody's now talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, something like that, and that will give you the facility or the first step to predict shortcut, something like maintenance and what you have to do before it fails, right? So I think it's helpful.
It helps. It helps. Although, and again, I would like to get your feedback as well. But I think what you see in every industry, that certain buzzwords are kind of like abused. We talked about cloud computing many years ago. We thought cloud computing is going to be everything. All our IT problems will be solved, and it's the answer to everything. And in data center, and I give you a good example, I was in Vietnam a few weeks ago and we talked about AI as well. And one after the other vendor came to me and said, we have AI. And when I asked them to show some stuff, I said, so how does it work? He said, we do this, and then you change the parameter here and change the parameter there. And I said, well, I don't think that's AI. Because AI is, self-running, right?
Yeah. Self-running.
It's autonomous, right?
Yeah. Right.
So
Autonomous.
theoretically, it's stick in the CD, press enter, and for the rest, everything runs for itself, right? And the moment you still have to do changes, that is in probably in our world where we're coming from, that is what we call rule-based data analysis. In the old days, we had it as well. We had data, and then we start making formulas around data. That if this happens, then that happens, then we do this. That is what a lot of AI is all about. It's getting better, but the real true AI, I think we're still waiting for the real thing to happen.
Yeah, but still we can now concentrate on human resources. So what is the prerequisite for data centers to have good people? To have good people, right? There are a lot of engineers or managers, floor managers, electricity managers, and there's a lot of things. Can we afford that? What kind of people do we need?
That's a problem. If it's a small data center, right? Like say in a small enterprise, they are struggling because you can't hire a lot of people. So now you might have one person wearing multiple hats.
Taking care of everything.
Actually, it's the IT manager, it's the security manager, it's the floor manager, it's the IT operator, and it becomes very difficult. Larger operators, and that's where you see, like the cloud providers, etc. They have different disciplines, different people assigned to those disciplines, and even within one discipline, for example, electrical, they have the the professionals and they have the experts and all that stuff. But if you are running a traditional enterprise organization, then you're limited on staff. And frankly speaking, the data center is always seen as this little back blocks, somewhere downstairs, don't need attention, don't need a lot of money, just leave it there and it runs by itself. But it's a critical component in any business nowadays, right? If the data center is down, so we see that some data center owners, and that could be an enterprise, could be commercial, they still start cutting down on staff, training. They always assume that people learn on the job. But yeah, a small mistake can have huge impact. So our recommendation always like put people through proper skills analysis, put them on the right training, and do recertification, because you can't say I learned data centers 10 years ago and I still know everything today, right? It's a very quickly evolving industry.
That's a mistake.
One of my good friends, he's a network expert, and he said, you know what, I'm not an expert anymore. And I was kind of shocked when he said that. And he said, you know what, if I want to stay an expert, I cannot work anymore. He said, I need to study every day to keep up with all the new technologies. He said, it's simply impossible to put it in one person. Very complex nowadays.
That's the problem. To keep up alone, to keep up with the technology, is a big problem.
It's very tough.
So it depends on the persons, right? To somehow they to be persistent.
Correct.
And to learn something new.
And part of it is by the organization, but I think also a lot is down to the personality. Are they willing to learn and invest in themselves to continuously learn new technologies and new methodologies? So the world is getting too fast. It's too fast, I think.
Okay, Edward, how diverse is the skill of the data center professional? I mean, why we need a data center competency standard? I mean, is it very diverse, or is it pretty standard? So
Well, in terms of competences in the data center industry, is a lot of skills required, right? Because we're talking about architectural aspects that need to be satisfied. We need to look at physical security, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, the usual things, but also networking, fire safety, etc. So it's very hard to put it all in one person's head. They could know a little bit of everything, but they could never be a specialist anymore. So what we have done a long time ago, we developed what we call the DCCF, the Data Center Competence Framework, and that lists all the various competences that required in a data center environment, and then we map it to job roles. And again, a small organization might have a lot of competences at a certain level in one job role, where the more bigger, mature organizations might separate it more by discipline over different heads, so to speak.
Okay, standard like DCCF, is it used globally, or?
It's globally available. It's a free document. People can download it, and from there they can look at, say, the job roles that we have. Are they applicable? Now, as I said, it's a framework, so it's a good starting point. But we see that organizations adopt from there and then customize it based on their own organizational setup, etc. Because we have enterprise data centers where all the skills are in-house. We see data centers where certain parts are outsourced, for example, so they might only require certain skills in-house and the rest they kind of buy, so to speak. But it's a good starting point for sure.
So let's talk about clouds. Clouds. So everybody is betting about clouds, and we assume that, like Didi said before, we'll still need data centers disciplines in clouds. But just recently I read that 40% of the data centers need skills. That they are still looking for it.
True.
So what is the sense of why do they need that? Because as I understand that cloud will provide everything.
The magic answer.
The magic answer. But still, I can assume that big companies like banks, insurance, they want to have their own clouds, something like that. Their private clouds, something like that. That's what I'm thinking about. Is it true, or?
I agree. I think when the cloud thing started, everybody thought that, okay, we're done now. We don't need our own IT and environment. We put everything in the cloud and we can sleep at night and we're done. But over time, people start realizing that the cloud is not the magic answer.
No.
So what we see more and more, that we look into what we call hybrid cloud, where people have part on-premise, so their own data center, and the other part is out into a cloud environment. Of course, there are some organizations that put everything in the cloud. That typically depends on the size of the organization and the criticality, but more hybrid cloud. I think also in cloud, a lot of people have found out that it's not, the magic thing. Easy to move things in the cloud. Cheap, relatively speaking. But once you take data out of the cloud, you're going to pay for it very dearly. And I think more people start realizing that cloud is not always cheap. In the old days, when we had the traditional data center, when we want to roll out a new application, you know what we did, right? We ordered a new server, go through the procurement cycles, get the server, put it in, load it. Now a system engineer can literally duplicate one server 20 times. The bad news is he doesn't always realize that finance get now a bill for 20 times a virtualized server, right? So you see a lot of these things happening where companies now suddenly get a bill from a cloud provider, say, how does this happened? So apart from that, like I said, more hybrid type of environment, and that's where you see that organizations still need data centers, still need the skills for data centers, but even if you put it in the cloud, my old boss always say, trust is good, checking is better. So can we always trust the cloud provider, or do we still want to have certain skills to be able to go there and check ourselves whether everything is according to what we believe they should be doing? So the growth for data center personnel is still increasing, not only because of this hybrid, but also more data centers, more cloud providers. So it's a continuous growth market. In Asia, it's about 16% growth year on year now.
Yeah, you are talking about data. That's quite crucial, right? So you have to protect your own data.
Correct.
And not only in cloud, also in your premises,
correct.
Right? That's why I think we still need many data center experts, something like that. But I don't understand the know-how or the knowledge that you have to have. Is it IT people or semi? Because something like data centers, infrastructures management, do they need IT knowledge or do they need management?
Yeah, like electrical engineer, mechanical engineer.
Right, mechanical engineer. They are not IT people, right? Do they?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, it's an interesting question, right? Because if you look at, say, a cloud data center, it's just like any other data center, right? It's this big building with power and cooling, etc. So you still need the traditional skills, but I think from an overall perspective, you see a more and more, like what we call software anywhere environment. Networks getting virtualized, storage getting virtualized, so you see that the skills, the traditional skills of electrical, mechanical, etc. is still there. But in terms of the core skills, you see a more into the software-defined everything. So yes,
software-defined.
Virtualization. So any person who wants to work in data centers now, unless you want to be a facility engineer, the traditional building stuff, but I think the growth is really in software. So understanding virtualized environment, clouds, architecture, security is a big thing. AI, IoT, and all these things that go around. That is where a lot of growth is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everything will be virtualized too. Yeah.
That's where it's going to. Yeah.
We're
gonna live in the metaverse. That doesn't exist. We're gonna buy land and houses in a world that doesn't exist.
They don't have enough objects, so they use human now as an object for virtualization.
Exactly. We're gonna live in a scary world.
Scary, very scary.
Yeah. No, it isn't interesting. The whole metaverse is very interesting because I think in our generation, coming from a traditional business, traditional environment, right? The way we interacted, like we met in the Shangri-La, right? Very traditional. Sitting in the lobby, having a discussion face to face, seeing each other, meeting each other, etc. Now people meet online, don't know the face.
That's not fun.
Don't even know whether the person is really the person, right? And it's a pretty scary world. And
scary.
It's scary world. So I think the whole metaverse, I think we're going to see more problems in the world than people are anticipating it, because it's a scary environment, especially when it's not identifiable, i.e. people can be anonymous.
Yeah.
That is the biggest problem that we need to solve.
I think it will be more crime.
Definitely. You see it already now, right? Everybody can be a bully online because you don't know anyway. So I could threaten you online. But if you see me in real life, you might say, "What do you talk to me like that?" And you might slap, and I'm gone. So, but I think it's a real problem. I think people's social skills, are very important to get through life. And social skills in a virtualized world doesn't really exist, in my view. And when they live in a virtual world, with those skills they have there and the way they interact there, and then they come back in the real life, I think that's going to be a very shock effect in how that works. They are totally unrelated with each other. It's scary. It's scary.
Okay.
So the world's not going to be a better place.
Let's go to the moon.
Or Mars, as Elon Musk said.
Okay, now there is another part of data center that we haven't talked about.
Yeah.
It's greenery.
Yeah.
Greenery.
Green data center.
Green data center. Many are talking about renewable energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about this kind of greenery data center? Yeah.
Oh yeah, ultimately it's a good thing if we can reduce carbon footprint in the world, right? Nobody's going to argue and say that's a bad thing, right? I think we all believe it's a good thing.
Is it a high effort to implement?
It's big. It's a big
It's
effort.
big effort.
And I think a lot of it is a bit, fake. Sorry for using that word, because I see data centers that they're like 10 megawatts, so we a green data center. I say you're never a green data center, right? Because you're still using electrical energy. Electrical energy is generated by something, unless fossil fuel, right?
Yeah.
Gas or coal or whatever. Unless you're connected to a nuclear power reactor, then you can call yourself maybe green, right? Because nuclear doesn't have CO2, but anything else is not green. So some data centers say, yeah, but we buy the credits, offset carbon credits.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's kind of like buying your way out to not look green, right? That is not real green. If you say you're green, to me, you cannot buy yourself out of green, right? Then you need to be truly sustainable with natural energy, etc. But if you say, well, I throw 10 megawatt of CO2 in the world, but I buy somebody else's credit, now I look better.
That's bad.
That is barter trade of carbon. That has nothing to do with making the world a better place. You're just basically taking somebody else's unused credit and say, now I look green.
I look green.
So I think that's a big problem in the industry, right? If you truly want to build, green data centers, then there's there. But what I said, many years ago already said, the biggest issue is data. Because we generate too much.
Yeah.
That is the core problem. Can you imagine, and I'm not saying we should, but can you imagine a world without Facebook, Instagram and all those social media? So we're not, taking pictures of a pizza from 20 different angles and send it to 100,000 imaginary friends, all right? And it is stored there for 100 million years, right?
Yeah.
That is the key. Why do we need so many data centers? Well, that's not because we do more work in the world, but it's because of all the data that we're storing and processing, and we keep it forever. In my old days, when we had, for example, simple analogy here, we had accounting files, our bookkeeping, and we by law had to keep it for 5 years.
Yeah.
What did we do after 5 years? Throw it away. Why? Because otherwise we need to buy a bigger building. I don't want to do that. I just throw the old stuff away. Now, when was the last time you threw stuff away on your hard disk? And how many copies of your hard disk do you make just because of redundancy? So people make copies just to be sure. Don't want to clean it up because I don't know there's too much of it. So just buy a new hard disk because it's cheaper than sitting 20 hours to clean it up, right? So we're having so much unused data. It's unbelievable. And we keep it forever.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that is the problem that we are, especially with
facing now.
IoT. If you look at, say, a Tesla car, it's, if I might have the number wrong, but from what I recall, it's something around 4 terabytes a day in data from all the sensors it has. Can you imagine that?
In one car.
In one car.
Yeah.
So can you imagine? I did once a calculation for a show in Sweden, where I calculated, say, if all the cars in Sweden would be converted to Tesla or any other electronic vehicle, and we keep all the data, the amount of data that is generated, how many data centers we need to build to store it.
Wow.
So then somebody was smart in the audience said, well, but do we need all the data? I said, well, what data would you like to keep? He said, well, that depends. I said, exactly, that's the problem.
Depends.
Because if you're a car manufacturer, you might want to keep the data on tear and vibration, etc. But as an insurance company, I have different needs.
Yeah.
If I am the car shock absorber manufacturer, I want that data.
That's
so
different.
Everybody wants a piece of the data to do their own analysis.
Right.
And we like to have a lot of data so that we can do analysis over the last 50 years, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So it stores forever. It becomes really a big problem.
Huge. Yeah.
It's a huge problem. So, and that is, I think, where it comes in. I think the future really is in, you can't stop data generation. That's the problem. You can't tell everybody, let's not make pictures of Facebook or pictures on Facebook of pizzas and what we eat every week. But you can hopefully find technology that can store the data in a much more efficient way. Current data storage is not very efficient, right? In how we do it. So maybe if new nanotechnology or whatever magical technology comes in where we can store data in a condensed, not so much power hungry way, that will be the ultimate answer.
All right. That's a lot of problems that we are facing here right now.
Yep. Yeah, it's true.
But somehow, go for it.
Exactly. No, keep working on it. But yeah,
Keep working.
Somebody's problem is another body's challenge and another one's solutions, right? So,
Yes.
But yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And again, I think we go back many years. Even in our days, we had challenges that we said, oh, how can we overcome it? And we'll always overcome it. So somehow.
More important, if you think that human resources are the most critical part that that make our business getting better and better, and how to utilize everything and how to avoid also some problems that we are talking about. So it's coming back to human resources.
It's ultimately it is, right? Although they start arguing that AI could
AI could help,
or could even be beating us in our own game, so to speak. That the AI becomes smarter than us humans.
You wish.
I hope it's not happening in my lifetime. But it's true. It's complex, but the human mind is very creative, and we always find new solutions and new ways of doing things. So let's hope that continues. So
yes. Okay, I think we do you have anything questions?
Yeah, I think one more that you know that Indonesia is planning to move the capital to
new location,
Borneo, Kalimantan, new location. And Kalimantan is the only, or Borneo is the only island in Indonesia that is not on the Ring of Fire. So it's free of the Ring of Fire, but it's still empty now. It's
empty.
And I think gradually Indonesian government wants to build everything that related to a government institution there, including the national data center. So we're going to build a national data center there. I think we still struggle on defining, call it national, how big, what sort of service that they can provide, and those kind of things. Do you have any experience to help a particular country to develop a national data center?
We've seen it in a few countries. In fact, we are actually involved in the national data center.
Oh, really?
As well,
okay.
From an auditing certification point of view, because they wanted to build to certain standards. In terms of sizing, it's always very difficult, because when you build a data center, you kind of need to look, 10, 15 years in the future. So what we see now more is that data centers are being built in a modular fashion.
Modular fashion.
In the old days, traditionally, we bought a piece of land and a building and we filled up everything in one go. But now you see that people say, okay, we have kind of a historical analysis. We kind of like extrapolate it to the future, and the future might be wrong. If a new technology comes out that we don't know today, every plan might be unplanned, so to speak. But they kind of like take certain extrapolation of data growth and new technology, etc., and then they're looking at a modular type of implementation, because it all depends, as you rightfully said, what type of service are we going to offer. Let's say that the government here says we're going to put everything on e-governance. We're going to store all the data that we have electronically, etc. Then that could have a huge impact in what is required. So right sizing of a data center that is expected to live for the next 10, 20 years is a very, very hard thing to do, which, coming back again a bit to sustainability and green, what we see in the market is a lot of oversizing and underutilization. Because a lot of data center designers, they say, I'd rather design too big than too little. Because if I design it too big, then at least nobody calls me and say, I can't fit it in the building anymore. But if I build it slightly too small, then they will call me up and they will start shouting at me because I did a wrong sizing, right? And that is a problem, because, as you very well know, that if things are oversized, it never runs optimized. So there's a lot of capital money that's thrown away, so the capex is very bad. Return on the investment therefore gets impacted as well, but also from an efficiency point of view. Ideally speaking, equipment runs at 80-90% utilization rate, then it's the most efficient. But data centers that we see 40%, if we're lucky 60%, and again it comes back that people say I rather over design. Now how can you avoid part of it is by modular. You can say we design it. When we start hitting, for example, 80% of our capacity, then we plan for the next module to come online, and hopefully in those steps we can grow. But it's a difficult process. Okay. It's not easy.
If within 1 or 2 days, and official from the Ministry of Communication and Information come to us and ask, hey, Inixindo, how many people do we need to have to run that national data centers?
Yeah.
Because we know that there is a formula for calculating, like if you want to build a certain square meters of data center with level 4 or level 3, then you need to have this amount of power, this amount of cooling. But there's never been a calculation on people. How many people to run?
True. Yeah, in the old days, when I was still actively involved in running, we had a simple formula that we said from an IT perspective. We said one person can run about 30 servers. Right, from a system admin point of view.
1 person, 30 servers.
30 servers, but now it doesn't work that way anymore, because I can have 30 servers on the virtualized single hardware platform. So now you start looking at, say, how many different applications do we have, and all this stuff. It's a very tough calculation. It's very difficult to say,
there is no like a standard of
there is no standard. There are some, best practices that people might, but it depends on whether it's virtualized, non-virtualized, is storage virtualized, or is every compute virtualized. But it's very hard. You could do the simple 1 person per 50 rack kind of thing, with a bit of automation, then it might be possible, but it's tough. Do you run 24/7? Do you need more people because of safety concerns, right? You cannot have 1 person at night, for example. It needs to be always a backup. So if you ask me, say, we have a 10,000 square feet data center, I have X amount of servers, how many people do I need? You need to really go back to how many applications, because if I have, for example, 5 applications, but they all run on one single type of database, whatever the type is, then potentially I only need 1 physical resource for my database. But if I have 3 different type of databases running, might not fit all in 1 person. So it's a very complex matter.
Yeah, because we know that Google have huge data center. Amazon have a huge data center. Microsoft have a huge data centers. Alibaba is a huge data. Do they have a formula on that? Is it different from?
Yeah, it's a different environment, because they running basically only quote unquote few services, so to speak. So they don't they only run a number of applications, right? A government could have thousands of applications running, so that becomes more difficult to manage. Right, same as with a traditional data center. The rack, as I sometimes say, the racks look like a museum. But if you look at the rack of Amazon or Microsoft or Google, their racks are quite uniform in terms of approach. Therefore, less manpower is required. So don't forget that in those cloud providers, they have a lot of automation. So Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are very good at automating, and their AI becomes very, very strong in their environment. So, for example, in one of the providers, I'm not going to favor any of the ones that we mentioned, but they have a lot of AI around cooling and shifting workload. So they could literally shift workload at night into, say, a couple of racks and shut down the other racks. So how many people do I need? Well, these racks are basically dead at night, but when the day starts, they start shifting workload again, and they So it's difficult to say. There are also experiments with completely, hands-off data centers. You probably have all read about
hands-off data centers. So no people, completely lights out type of operation, self-managed, commissioning in terms of starting up services and distributing workload, completely self-regulating. They've done already tests on a limited scale, and that seems to be working. So where we still need people is, of course, when we need physical stuff. Although I've seen one data center where actually robots are taking servers out and putting servers in China. In China, fully automated rack replacement, server replacement. Really?
So they put in the staging room, they put the server in, and then after that a robot goes into the server and takes, screws out, put the thing back again. A robot goes to the back, literally with hands, that grabs the UTP cable, and the UTP, there's always a little clip, grabs the UTP, take it out, put it back in. It's
robot all
robot driven.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. So I hope you retire soon because you might be forced into retirement. but it's something that we see happening, right? And I know, for example, because in our days we were always like replacing hardware.
Right.
And again, I know one of the operators in the US, they are container driven. They don't do replacement of hardware anymore. So to them, a container is a compute power, storage power module. When certain levels go down, let's say
just replace it all.
They just scrap the container, drop a new one in, done. So they don't send engineers in to replace network cables or cards anymore and hard disks, etc. It's just kind of like, it's just a box. I think we saw the same in our industry, right? When we had the TV and video recorders, and when it broke down, you went back to the shop and they did a repair. Nowadays, a CD player, $99, just throw it away.
Throw it away.
Going there and coming back is just not worth your time and money anymore sometimes, right? And just say throw it away, buy a new one, it's easier. Don't even have to go to the shop. Amazon delivers by drone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Edward. I think the time is already apa namanya?
Well over the limit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know.
Much over the limit. No. I'm
can
just
always
kidding.
cut out.
I'm just kidding. We thank you for your time, your precious explanation, and we thank you also for your trust for us as a partner since more than 15 years. Yeah. We deliver training and certification on behalf of you, right? And you come also often to Indonesia, to Jakarta, to several cities to teach by yourself.
Used to be,
Yeah. Just the one complaint from the students that you have to speak in Indonesian language, though. That's the complaint.
Okay, I'll practice on that one. I've already started practicing with Makan and Minu, so I'll try to do on the data centers. But yeah, no. Thanks very much for having me. Really enjoyed this chat, and again, thanks for working with us for so many years already, very successfully. I think we have helped think together the industry in Indonesia.
My hair is already white, and you still have brown.
Still great.
Before the discussion, I talked to him. You had dye or this natural hair?
Yeah.
Because our hair grows whiter.
White.
Yeah.
So this can tell us who's making the profit, who's not.
I'm very relaxed because you guys work very hard to sell the course, and I'm just sitting at home having my glass of wine at the beach. Works like a charm. You should try it.
There is a song for him.
Oh, is it?
Forever Young.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, no, I'm blessed with young hair. I don't know how it happened, but okay. The gods
Well, you
always
look
have.
still young also.
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad.
Compared to him and me, and me.
Yeah. Oh, I guess you guys are married, I guess. Just kidding.
That's kidding.
Cut that out because I might be not married anymore after this as well.
Okay.
Now, again, thanks very much for having me, and
Thank
again,
you.
thanks for Inixindo and the trust in us as well, and helping the industry, because I think the industry in Indonesia has come a long way.
Yeah.
Thanks to all the education that we have done
big,
here.
still big.
We're looking forward to many more years.
Yeah. Salam kompeten.